Hello and welcome to the National Portrait Gallery and tonight's event, the Curated Ego, What Makes a Good Selfie. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you all here. I'm Sarah and I'm a photographic artist and member of studioSTRIKE, and together with Miss Shadia, who is currently studying philosophy at UCL, we've curated this event to explore what these leading academics and artists across photography, philosophy and neuroscience make of the selfie. This event has been made possible through the support and guidance of studioSTRIKE founders Natasha Caruana and Ashin Dakordi, who are up there in the audience, and the excellent ethical internship scheme run by the UCL Advances programme. studioSTRIKE is a not-for-profit that began in 2010 as artist studios on the top floor of London's only trade union-owned public house. At peak capacity, it hosted a professional community of 18 creatives from a variety of disciplines, ranging from printmaking, documentary film, fine art photography, jewellery, textiles, anthropology. And between April and May 2012, it hosted the free Bread and Roses Film Festival. The two-month multi-strand arts festival investigated the interaction between workers' rights and capitalism through a programme of performance art, historical and contemporary photography exhibitions, publishing awards, live music, artist talks, and documentary and fiction film. Our ethos at studioSTRIKE is to collaborate across disciplines in an effort to utilise art to foster dialogue around issues of women's rights, workers' rights, immigration, identity, and social activism. In autumn 2013, studioSTRIKE relocated to the new Acme Stockwell Studios and is continuing its work online and with a series of pop-up events such as this. Mick and everyone, I'll tell you a little bit about tonight's lineup. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us in National Portrait Gallery. I would like to start by thanking Fiona Smith and the rest of the events team at the National Portrait Gallery for supporting us and hosting us tonight. We're also very grateful to the panelists who made this possible, and to the chair, Annebella, Pollen, who is a senior lecturer at the University of Brighton in History of Art and Design. And joining us tonight a bit later will also be two photographers who will give us their take on the selfie. They have been selected through an open call for submissions that got over 130 responses. We are really grateful for all the artists who sent us their work. Is being screened just behind me. And I don't envy the judges who had to narrow it down to Catherine Ballet and Ure Castellic. Also, a special mention goes to Clarlie Clark, who, although she was selected to come here tonight, she was unfortunately unable to come. The judges were Diane Smith, who's the deputy editor of the British Journal of Photography, Tim Clark, who's the chief editor and founder of 1,000 Words magazine, and the photographer and artist Tom Hunter. We would like to say a sincere thank you to them for giving us their time and expertise into running this selection. Now I'm going to hand over to Annebella, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my turn to say a quick thank you. I'm Annebella Pollen, and I'm very pleased to be here leading this event, and I've been invited to come tonight by Sarah and Mick now. So it's great to see such a fantastic audience. I heard there were crowds outside the double doors, and I hope everyone who wanted to come and hear us talk tonight managed to get in. I'm just going to say a few words about how the event is going to be organised, and then I'm going to move on to flick through some slides to open up some discussion of the kinds of themes and the issues that we'll be exploring. Excuse me. So each of the invited contributors after my short introduction will be introduced in turn, and then each speaker has 10 minutes to respond to the theme of the evening from their own particular perspective. The two selected photographers, the two winning photographers that Mick just mentioned, will come up and speak about their work for 5 minutes each. And then there will be some panel discussion, and then very importantly, lots of time for you to ask questions and make comments, because I feel this is a subject that everyone owns. So I'm going to get things going by just framing the discussion and highlighting some possible themes that the panel may pick up or return to. So as you may well know, in 2013, Oxford Dictionaries, not Oxford English Dictionaries, not Oxford University Press, just Oxford Dictionaries, an online dictionary, announced selfie to be their word of the year based on its popularity of usage. And at its most simple, the term selfie is used to indicate a self-portrait made with a handheld digital camera or camera phone. Of course, while the term may be new, the practice of photographic self-portraiture is not. The search for origins is perhaps futile, but nevertheless enjoyable, and through some kind of curious process of reverse engineering, American photography pioneer Robert Cornelius seems to have been crowned a kind of godfather of the selfie, with this image that some claim to be the first photographic self-portrait, or at least the first American photographic self-portrait, which was taken 2 months after Daguerre announced his photographic method. And this is despite its non-conformity to the definition. It's not handheld, it's not digital, and it's certainly not instantaneous in character given its extended exposure time. So this word selfie has Australian origins, apparently, and as such we could liken it to other fun Australian terms, Barbie, abbreviated barbecue, tinny for a can of beer, and so on. But the word seems to be more than just a simple shorthand for self-portraiture. It seems to summarise a particular kind of practice, I think, a kind of practice that's enabled through the particular affordances of the networked image. And as the excellent title of this event indicates, Curating the Ego, selfies have become associated with the studied selection of a profile picture on social media, perhaps edited from one of many hundreds or thousands of choices, and as such it can be read as a knowing performance in pursuit of an ideal self, rehearsed, practiced, carefully angled and framed, and yet seeking to appear natural. And I've put here perhaps the mistress and the master of the celebrity selfie, Kim Kardashian and Justin Bieber, both of them topless, coincidentally or not so coincidentally. And the term selfie has also become associated with forms of popular photography that have been commonly, snobbishly, I think, dismissed. So souvenir images saying, "I was here." And particularly the new use of the camera as mirror among the photography of teenagers, most commonly girls. Way back in 2007 or 2007, I remember reading an article which discussed the ways that particular product manufacturers were gendering their objects they were gendering their goods for particular markets. And instead of making cameras pink and sparkly, as would normally be the case in marketing to young girls and women, camera manufacturers were making the automatic focal length of cameras for girls arm's length, because it had been noted even then in 2007, long before this term was created, that young girls in particular seemed to have a propensity to take self-portraits and sometimes group portraits at arm's length, and the same was not seen to occur among young men. So because of these associations and the light shone on the term by its new award-winning status, the selfie's also been the subject of some recent anxieties in the press, one famous example here. And the popularity of the selfie is commonly seen as a symptom of cultural narcissism, a distraction from political action, and indeed poor taste, perhaps due to its association with the culture of teenage girls and young women, which is rarely taken seriously as refined culture, but also with excess. The sheer quantities of photographs it's possible to now take and circulate with digital technology means that the shift from a single self-portrait to an internet full of selfies ramps up anxieties exponentially. And in another famous case, when Obama was photographed participating in a selfie with David Cameron and Danish Prime Minister Helle Thorning-Schmidt at Nelson Mandela's memorial service in December, there was much hand-wringing in the press about the trivialisation of political culture, and indeed the taboo against photography at funerals showed itself to still be strong. And as The Guardian has put it as just one example from the press, the selfie represents heartless self-obsession and inane photophilia. I'd say also that there's something about the self-consciousness of the selfie that makes it distinctive. Indeed, if you search for #selfie on Twitter right now, most posts seem to be somehow about the selfie rather than just straight selfies. And you can see this, for example, in the ironic and spoof and playfully competitive examples in the so-called Selfie Olympics fad. So the selfie is rarely a form that takes itself seriously. The status of the selfie then, as simultaneously as old as photography itself and the latest of trends thrust into the limelight, makes this evening a particularly timely event and promises some fascinating discussions where we might expand upon or challenge the accusations thrown at it. As both an act and an image, caught up in concerns about identity, technology, performance and memory, the selfie connects with core concerns across a range of areas within and beyond photography, including science, psychology, philosophy and beyond. And as such, this evening brings together a diverse and impressive range of scholars and practitioners, each with their own take on what makes a good selfie. So it's my pleasure now to pass over to our esteemed panelists, who I will introduce one by one. So we start, first of all, with Paul Snowdon, Professor of the Philosophy of Mind and Logic at University College London. Paul has an impressive range of publications that he asked me not to mention, so I will just say very humbly that he asked me not to mention them, but they are there, and I'm delighted to introduce Paul to speak next. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. It's almost, I think you're almost the biggest audience I've ever talked in front of. And what's ironic is that I'm talking at a kind of a workshop on a topic which I really don't know anything about. My role is that I'm a philosopher, and I think about persons and their identity over time and their nature. And another way of talking about that is to use the word self. So I think you could say I think about selves. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about. But it's not entirely easy to relate my engagement with selves with the photographic selfie. But I'll attempt to do that to some extent in my few remarks. Okay, now the concept of a selfie is basically a fairly simple concept, as I understand it, and that is, it's really the concept of a photograph of someone X taken by X. That is, it's the subject has to be of the person who's taking the picture. In this respect, it has kind of resemblance to the logical nature of the word suicide, because in suicide, someone has to, if there's a suicide, they have to die, but they have to cause the death themselves. So suicide is rather like a selfie, logically speaking. and not in other respects. I'm not trying to say anything in other respects. Okay. So here I'm going to drop a name, just to show that I've done a little bit of research. The photographs done by Cindy Sherman, I count as selfies. I don't know whether that was agreement or disagreement. The thing is, it's not built into a selfie, as I understand it, although people might use the word differently, that it has to be recognizably of the person who's taking it. The person taking themselves can be using that to portray someone else or a different kind of character in the way that Sherman does. So I in the way I'm using it, although maybe not everyone is using it this way, her photos come under the general category of selfies. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the term self, but I want to make some attempt to relate what I'm saying to photographs. Okay, and one way of relating what I'm saying to photographs is this. It seems to me that when people engage in activities, photography being one, they do certain things, but they also have their own understanding of what they're doing. You might say they have their own narrative, which they tell themselves captures the activity they're engaged in. Okay, And one possible link between what I'm going to talk about and selfies is that the notion of the self might figure in the self-narrative of people who are engaged in taking them or thinking about them. So my remarks might have some link up to the way that people themselves who engage in taking selfies think about what they're doing. Maybe or maybe not. Okay, let's talk about the normal role in English of the word self to begin with. This is going to be very brief and very superficial, but because I want to whiz through just a few points. If you think about the word self in English, its dominant role is kind of being attached to other expressions, other nouns. So that, think in terms of pronouns, we have a pronoun him or her, and those can be used to pick out people in general. But if you attach the word self to these pronouns, that limits the significance and role that these pronouns can have. So in the sentence, John poisoned himself, right? The word himself has to refer back to the subject of the sentence, right? We can use it with objects, just ordinary objects, we could say, or processes. The fire burned itself out. And there the word itself has to refer to the fire which was getting burned out. You can also attach the word self to nouns in a way which restricts their reference too. So we have the notion of knowledge, which is a very general notion, but if you talk about self-knowledge, that has the effect of making us realize we're having to talk about a certain type of knowledge, the knowledge that someone has of themselves. So in general, in English, the word self functions in this kind of way as a term which gets attached to nouns or pronouns and influences their reference and meaning in a very systematic way which we all understand. Okay. However, the term self is not only used in this kind of way. The term self is also used as what might be called a noun. And so we talk about the self, where the word self there is a noun picking something out. We talk about a self, or selves in the plural. So the term self has a kind of a role attaching to other expressions, but it also has a role standing on its own, so it seems to me. Now, this role standing on its own is what might be called not part of normal conversation. Okay, the noun self doesn't really occur much in ordinary discourse. So if no one would say, how many selves are there in the room tonight? That's not a question that anyone would ask. No one would say, it's £1 a self to come in here. You'd say, how many people are there? Or it's £1 per person. Okay. So the noun self doesn't really have a very established use, as far as I can tell, in normal discourse. It's a term that belongs to what might be called philosophical or intellectual discourse. It's a term that people reach for when they're kind of theorizing, not when they're speaking about each other. Okay, so this, we've got to say a little bit, I'll just say a little bit about this theoretical use of the term self. Okay, and now here I want to say that the term self, as people use it, can be based on, has got two possible logics, two possible ways that it's understood. Okay, in one way, the noun self is stipulated as applying to each of us. So people who are talking this way would say, each of us is a self. I'm a self, everyone else here is a self. Okay. And that's the fundamental kind of logical rule governing that use of the word self. Now, it's a consequence, it seems to me, that if you use the word self in that sort of way, where we are or attached to us, there can only be one self, right? Namely, the thing that is the self. There can't be a multiplicity of selves because the self just is the person, okay? So understood that sort of way in which the basic restriction on the notion of self is one of us, there can only be one self per person or one self per one of ours. Okay, and in fact the logic of self is very similar in that way to the logic of person. These two terms are kind of closely related. What kind of theories of the self do people have? Well, here I've got to be very, very brief. I'm just going to sketch three kind of attitudes that philosophers have developed about the self or about the person, and just lay them before you so that you're acquainted with them. Not necessarily that they will mean anything very much to you, but let me just put it forward. One very long-standing conception of the self is the one that is famously attached to Descartes. And Descartes held that selves were kind of immaterial, spiritual egos which were related to bodies but which were separate from bodies. Rather like a kind of the religious conception of a soul. Okay, that's one conception of the self. Now, that has a lot of ancient supporters, but it isn't terribly popular now. And what's more, in that use of the word self, it's slightly hard to see how you can take a picture of a self, right? Because, I mean, being some non-physical, non-material thing, how can you photograph it? So in that use of the term self, really, selfies are misnamed, right? Misnamed. They're not picked. You can't have pictures of the self on this conception of the self. But let's leave that aside. There are two other conceptions that philosophers have developed, which I'm just going to mention very briefly, both of which start with the idea, which is commonsensical, so it seems to me, that the self or the person is basically nothing more than the body. All that there is to a self or a person at a time is the body that's there at that time. Anything that's a part of you, the self, is equally a part of the body that you have. Okay, so both of these are kind of ways of understanding the self as basically bodily things. And in that sense, of course, selves can be photographed. Bodily things can be photographed. But there are two views because they diverge over their understanding of what it is for a person or a self to be there over time. At a time, all you have really is a body, but over time, these two views I want to set out diverge. One view is the view which is associated with the old 17th century English philosopher Locke, but has had a lot of supporters, which is what really matters for the persistence of selves over time, or persons over time, is psychological links over time that are required for this to be the case. And in particular, in Locke's view, the crucial relation that defines whether a single self exists over time is the existence of memories linking present things to the past. You have to be able to remember what happened earlier to be the same self as did those things earlier. Why do they think this? Well, two kinds of arguments they've used. One is they have a sense that, as it might be called, an organism persists over time and it loses its mentality, right? It loses its mental functioning. There's a tendency on the part of some people to say there is no longer a self there, right? The self has gone, or the person has gone. So long as these mental links are absent, then we're not dealing with a self anymore. That's one kind of intuition. The other intuition, which tries to get mentality as being the sole defining feature, is things like teletransportation intuitions. Okay, and people have this cinematic kind of idea that you take someone and you zap their thoughts and consciousness and memory, and you transport those by some process to the far side of the universe and embed them in an object over there. Well, that's going to be the self or the person who is starting out zapped to the far side of the universe. Okay, that's one view. I can see some members of the audience disagreeing with that, which I think is good myself. I'm not wanting people to believe that. The alternative view is to treat roughly the self over time as might be called the human animal, the organism, which itself evolves over time but isn't tied to psychological processes or function. You can lose those if that's what happens to you. Okay. Can I have one more? Right, so that's what I wanted to say about the self governed by the logic of you are a self, and some different views. I wanted to add this. As far as understanding self is concerned, these two views, which are radically different, actually won't imply different results in the normal case. Because in normal cases, you have the same animal and you have the same memory, you have memories persisting as well. So covering the normal case, both views will converge on tracing people through time. It's only kind of extreme cases where selfies won't really be involved that they'll give you any difference. Do I? Okay. Right, sorry. I'm very bad at timekeeping. But I wanted to say that's one use of the term self in philosophical or intellectual discourse. But there are other uses of the term self, and I think these might be more relevant to selfies. In this kind of discourse about selves, two things are possible. One is some people talk about a multiplicity of selves, so associated with each of us is a multiplicity of selves. That's one. So you can call those self-multipliers. So one approach is to multiply selves. And another approach is to deny there is such a thing as the self. Okay, there are self-deniers. Now, it's obvious that if you're going to say either of those things, you can't mean by self yourself, right? Because you can't deny the existence of yourself, nor can you suppose there are more, as it were, of you than one. So anyone who talks this kind of way isn't going to anchor the notion of self by the rule, each of us is a self, right? They've got to understand it in some other way. And all I want to say is, I can't understand why there's any appeal to denying the notion of the self, saying, oh, look, really what's important is there are no such things as selves. Why should one, what is one trying to report by saying that? I mean, some people might have answers to that question, but it's not clear to me what it would be. So self-deniers, I don't really see why they say that. Self-multipliers are clearly registering something about the way we present ourselves in the world. Okay, they are onto something to do with human life. What is unclear to me is why we want to use the term self to do that. That's my only kind of worry there, because it kind of misleads one as to quite what the point that's being made. Okay, so two uses of the word self in kind of theory, one tied to the notion of we're each a self, others somehow detached from that notion, and they can go in different directions. Okay, I'm going to stop at that point, having failed to make the point I wanted to make. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul. I'm really sorry to cut Paul off in his prime, but we do have plenty of time for panel discussion time, so we can pick up on some of those ideas. And I know we will return particularly to that idea of multiple selves and singular selves. It was fascinating. That's what a professor of mind and logic thinks is a superficial presentation. To the rest of us, that's very analytically complex and it's very stimulating. Thank you.